All right, here we go. Parshas Ve'era. So we know Klal Yisrael's already in Mitzrayim, and that Kodesh Baruch was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, go to Paro and tell him, the Jews got to leave Egypt. It's game over, right? And it's interesting if you think about it. When Hashem tells Moshe game over, right? We saw at the end of last week's parsha that Moshe complained. He says when I go and tell him to stop the thing, he says Me'oz basi el pari l'daber b'shmecha. This is at the end of Parak Hey Pasach of Gimel, at the end of Parsha Shmos. And from the time when I went to Paro to speak in your name, Hera la'om hazeh, it was very bad for this nation. V'hatzel lo hitzalta samecha, and you didn't save Klal Yisrael. And interesting, because Chazal see from here that what's pshat, what's pshat Moshe Rabbeinu is talking like this. So the pasuk continues. This is Parak Vav Pasuk Aleph. Vayemer Hashem al Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Ata Sira, now you're going to see. And Rashi brings from the Medrash, Ata Sira, her heart al midaisa, you had second thoughts about what Hashem said. Loika Avram shamarti lo kivitz lo kikar l'chazara. Not like Avram Avinu that I told him that he's going to have children. And then I said, bring him on the Mizbeach, and, so what happened to the Haftacha that he's going to have children? He didn't say anything. No comment. He didn't think twice that anything bad about it. Right? But seemingly, Moshe Rabbeinu was fatained in a sense that you're telling me that there's going to be a geula for Klal Yisrael, and I come there, and fakir, it gets much worse. Right? Right before it gets light, that's the darkest time. And we mentioned this a few times, but over here it's clear in the Torah like this. Lefikach ata sira ha'osel lepare tira, v'lei ha'osel l'malchus shiva umas k'shavim l'Eretz Yisrael. It's a fascinating thing. It was already at this point that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu that you're going to see what I'm going to do to Paro. The games that I'm going to play with him, right? It's asher v'salalti b'Mitzrayim, the games that I'm going to play with him. With Mitzrayim, you're going to see, but you're not going to be zeichet to see the Shiva Umas when you're going to come into Eretz Yisrael, because Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't end up coming into Eretz Yisrael. And our Parsha Ve'era starts that there was a different, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe there were different Giluyim from the Ovis, and now HaKadosh Baruch Hu is changing the Hanhaga a little bit, right? Shmi Hashem lo nedati lehem, Shmi Hashem is the Shem of Rachamim, the Shem Havaya, which is the shame that's kailal all the other shemes. It's the most basic in a sense, the most elevated. V'chulu, and there's a haftaches l'chein emar lebnei Yisrael ani Hashem v'yitzeisi eschem mitachas l'lis Mitzrayim. On and on. V'lekachti eschem, the dal l'shen shel geula we have over here. V'yitzeisi v'yitzalti v'lekachti v'goalti v'hivesi eschem el ha'oretz asher nososi es yadi. Fine. Then we have a pasuk that says like this: "Vayidaber Moshe ken al bnei Yisrael." And Moshe spoke this to Klal Yisrael, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu just told him. V'lo shamu al Moshe, they didn't listen to Moshe. Mikotzer ruach me'avoda kasha, from their shortness of breath and from the difficulty of the avoda. So before we get on to anything, let's just see what Rashi says, and we'll take it from there. Rashi says, "V'lo shamu al Moshe lekiblu tanchumen." They weren't ready to accept the tanchumen that they were going to get out of Mitzrayim. The Gemara says in Brachas that you shouldn't be mefayez somebody b'shaz kaisai. When somebody's angry, it's not the time to try to calm him down. Why not? Try it. You'll see for yourself. It's not going to work. You have to wait for the right time to talk to him, when he's a little calmer, when he has ears, and he's going to be able to hear you. They were too fahakt and too busy with the avodah Mitzrayim that they weren't able to be makabel tanchumen. It's just interesting that Rashi uses a lashon of tanchumen, a lashon of comfort. The Yetzias Mitzrayim was a tremendous comfort for Klal Yisrael in the sense that now they were going to be under HaKadosh Baruch Hu's wing, and they're going to become Avdei Hashem. They're no longer going to be Avdei Paro. And it's interesting because when in the world of Tisha B'Av, in the world of Churban, right? We say Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, a double lashon of Nechama. So the Shem Yishmuel and others, I believe, also explain this way. That Nachamu, Nachamu, what's the pshat in the plural, in the double lashon? The pshat is because first you have to get to a state where you're able to hear the Nechama. And once you're holding by the state of hearing the Nechama, then you could be makabel the Tanchumen properly, and with that, you can actually get the comfort that you needed. But Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Klal Yisrael and tells them, it's game over. We're almost out of Mitzrayim. And he says, v'lo shamu al Moshe mikotzer ruach me'avodah kasha. And they weren't able to hear, they weren't able to listen to Moshe from kotzer ruach, from the shortness of breath, and me'avodah kasha. So what's kotzer ruach? Zokt Rashi. Kol mishu meitzer ruchai unshimasei ktsara ve'eni yachal harch unshimasei. If the breathing apparatus in a person's body doesn't work properly, kol mishu meitzer ruchai, somebody who, so to speak, holds his breath unshimasei ktsara, and his breath is short, ve'eni yachal harch unshimasei, he doesn't have the long proper breaths. Karv l'inyan zeh shemati beparsha zumei Rebbe Baruch ben Rebbe Lezer. I don't know who that is. Rashi says that he heard from in this parsha something, a similar idea from Rebbe Baruch ben Rebbe Lezer. Behaviourly raya mi mikra zeh. He brings me a raya from a pasuk in Yirmiyah. B'pam azayis eidiyim es yodi v'eskvuroisai v'yoidu kishmi Hashem. So, which is almost going on to a separate thing. But Al Kalpan Rashi is focusing on an interesting nakud over here, that he says that somebody who holds his breath, he can't, he's not going to be able to hear. Well, they weren't able to be makabel the tanchumah because of their shortness of breath. They were too fahakt. They were too caught up in it. And they, you have to take them away. First, you have to break them away from the malacha. And then you have to, train them in, so to speak, tell them about HaKadosh Baruch Hu or whatever it is that they needed to know in order to get them back on track. And, to be able to listen to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. Now, there's a lashon of the Archaim HaKadosh that many people are familiar with that says that the reason why they weren't able to hear Moshe Rabbeinu is because Lefish Le'hoy b'nei Torah, they weren't b'nei Torah. Torah is marchiv daita shel adam. Torah gives a person the capacity to hold and to be able to hear things, I'm assuming he's referring to even when they're going through a difficult time. There are many stories about different Gedolim. We already know from the times of, since the beginning of time, the Talmidei Chacham, the people that were Isaac B'Torah, they were Isaac B'Torah even when they had to go through a lot of pain. And Fakart, Lulei Saras Chashashua as a Varatibani, we know stories of people today that when things are difficult for them, when they're going through difficult times, they sit with the Gemara, and that's where they're at. But I was thinking of something very interesting. We have in Parshas Mishpatim, the Parsha of an Evet, and then the person says, the Evet says, Ahavti es Adoni, I like my master, I love him, I feel connected with him, I want to stay. So Evet Ivri doesn't stay for 7 years, right? He has to leave, right? So what happens? So the pasuk says, the pasuk says that you drill a hole in his ear, and he works for the master forever. Right? It's a strange thing. What do you make a hole in his ear for? Right? So Rashi brings it's a Gemara. What's the pshat that we drill a hole in the ear as opposed to any other part of the body? I'm reading Rashi over here. And a person that heard on Har Sinai, he stole, and so when a person steals, then they sell him as an eved. So that's why he didn't hear Leisignov, so he gets sold as a slave. Fine. This is what I want to focus on a little bit more. What's going on over here? What's happening is that this person went and was kind of adin la'atzmai. The whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim is Tavdinus Elikim ala Razeh. The whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim is that we Bnei Yisrael can become Bnei Yisrael and we can become avadim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? What happened? This person, for some reason, it didn't go into his ears. It didn't enter into his system in a sense that he should be able to hear properly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. Oizen sheshama al Har Sinai ki li Bnei Yisrael avadim v'holach v'kona odin la'atzmai tirza. The ear that heard on Har Sinai that you should be for me, Bnei Yisrael should be for me, my slaves, my servants, and this person goes and is kaina odin for himself. Tirza, that's why we're going to make a hole in his ear. It's a punishment for his ear. So avodah heim le avodim la avodim v'holach zev v'kona odin la'atzmai. Fine. So it's thinking that these two things, l'chayra, go together. Why? Because the whole purpose, really, of how to become an Eved Hashem is by hearing and by listening to what Rabbeinu Shalom wants from us. The Maral talks on this Gemara, that he brings from Rishonim, that the Gemara says in Baba Kama, when in HaChovel someone damages somebody else, so he has to pay Nezek Tzari Pushavas and Boishas. Chershai, if he made him deaf, nice and light to make kulai. He has to pay for his entire everything. What's the pshat? Because a person's deaf, he's like a brick. There's no communication. It's very difficult to communicate. Throughout Shas, there's different sugis of cherish. So I always tell to interesting Rashi and Psachim, in talking about different, the Gemara Psachim, the third parak is dealing with different consistencies of doughs that you bake. So one, it's a shayla of chametz and whatnot. So one of the doughs that's mentioned there in the Gemara is something called a batek hacherish. So b'pashtus it means that it's a very thick dough. But Rashi, I believe, Sandaf Mem Gimel Mem Dalet, somewhere around over there, explains that batek hacherish is a pshat that we don't know vos tutzach inside the dough. We don't know what's going on inside. So you could have a cherish, a person could be a brilliant person, but because we're lacking the communication skills to communicate with this person with what's really going on in his mind and how he sees the world and how he views other people and things like that, so it's going to be, because we can't communicate with him, so then he's considered a cherish and he's part from the mitzvahs, as we know from Mishnayos throughout. So that's one thing that they weren't able to hear. But I had an interesting ha'ara. The Mad Nazach. We know that besides for the fact that they weren't able to hear, but it comes from the Arizal, and maybe it's mentioned earlier than him also, that when Klal Yisrael was in Mitzrayim, the Dibur was in Golus. The Kayach HaDibur was in Golus together with Yidden. Now we know, just for a basic background, what does this mean? So the Pashtus is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Adam, he created him to be a person, the defining factor between a person and an animal is his Kayach HaDibur. Vayipach ba'apam nishmas chayim, and the Targum says l'ruach memalala, somebody that speaks l'shamu el ma'isha mikotzer ruach. There was some kind of kotzer, there was a shortness of ruach from the ruach memalala, of the kayach of speech of a person that was supposed to be, it was in galus together with them. And if a person is not able to listen to the mitzvahs of the Torah of his design properly, right? So he's still an eved, like the Gemara says in Kedushin, like Rashi says in Parshas Mishpatim, that he's still avodim la'avodim. I think Hamar they get interesting ha'ara. Shevet Levi we know from the Chazal, and we know from the Rambam. The Shevet Levi was not mishabed themselves in Mitzrayim. Shevet Levi held themselves to a higher standard, whatever the reason is. They held themselves to a higher standard. They were not mishabed in Mitzrayim. Now, what does Shevet Levi get besides for the Kahuna? The Leviim. I have to look into this. I just thought of this mamish a couple of minutes ago. What do the Leviim have? So obviously the Kehanim do the avodah that they have to do. They're makar the karbanis, whatever that is. The Leviim are broken into two parts. The Leviim are they're split. Half of the Leviim say Shira, and half of the Leviim, they're Misharim and Mishayarim. They're the gatekeepers and the musicians. I was thinking very interesting. Why does Shevet Levi become musicians? Let Shevet Yisachar be the musicians. Why Epis Shevet Levi? Because Shevet Levi was Zeicha to Shira in the Beis HaMikdash because they never experienced the Kotzer Ruach. There's certain types of singing, right? Especially in Chazanis and the like, you have to stretch out a note for a very, very long time. And you have to have very, very long breath in order to make these notes carry on. So actually we could say that that's why Shevet Levi was Zeicha to have Shira in this Eifen, because they were never Meshabed themselves. They never experienced any kind of Kotzer Ruach. Now, I wanna talk about something for another minute. The Gemara Tainas tells us an interesting Maisa. The Gemara says there were two Amiroim sitting together, and one of them asked the other one. He says, "Nu zogab sa shtigul teira." So he told them, "Ein masichem basuda, we don't speak during a meal." So why don't we speak during the meal? Because it's a sakana shem yakdim kadol leveshet. The food pipe, the person might choke, as we know from the Leil HaSeder. So when he finishes eating, he asked him to Zogab Savart. He says, "Yaakov Avinu lay meis." He says, "Yaakov Avinu never died." So fine. Obviously, we understand what that means. It doesn't mean that it's not in a physical sense. It means that he still lives on. Fine, Seder. However, we're going to understand that. But the nakuda that I want to bring out from this is that what's kana and veshet? Kana and veshet are the windpipe and the food pipe that are in a person's throat, right? The trachea and the esophagus. Now, don't ask me which one's which, because I never remember. But the kana is the windpipe. Yeah. So it's like this. The Chida explains that when Adam Rishon was chayte ber eitz hadas, so what happens when a person eats food? So it goes, obviously he puts it in his mouth first, and then he chews it, he swallows it, it goes down into his digestive system, v'chulu, v'chulu, v'chulu. Now, what ends up happening when it goes into his digestive system is that it gets broken down, and it turns in, obviously the waste goes to waste, and the different parts turns to proteins, but a lot of what happens to the nutrients that we take in when we eat, it goes into the bloodstream. And when things go into the bloodstream, it gets spread all around. The blood carries it all over throughout our body, everywhere. So when Adam Rishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, the only part of the guf that was not affected from the achila was his windpipe, because his food pipe digested the food. So anywhere in his body where the food got to, it was paigim, because he ate from the Eitz Hadas. So the kana, the windpipe, was never nifgam, because it never got a pagam, because food doesn't go there. If I cared, like the Gemara says, if food would go into the windpipe, it would cause them to choke, and it would be a sakana shem yakdim kadol leveshet. Right? So Zok the Chida, that's the pshat in the Hemshech HaGemara. Why does he tell them ein masichem basuda? Right? Because the one thing that we have that was not nifgam by the chet of Adam Rishon was the koyach hadibur. And Zok the Chida, that's the pshat in the Chomer. That's pshat why it's so severe. The dibur dvar ma'asurim, lashon hara, rechilos, and all these things. That's why it's so severe. It's just words. Right? We always say it's just words, big deal. No, it's not just words. First of all, sometimes words affect people, as we know, right? But besides for that, there's a inherent pagam when a person speaks dvar ma'asurim. He's not just. It's very interesting because the Chofetz Chaim writes in Shmiras HaLashon. It brings from I believe it brings from the Arizal, that the pshat is like this: that when a person is a person is made up of Ramach Evarim, 248 Evarim, and Shasai Gidim, right? Ramach is mitzvah sasei, and 365 mitzvah sasei. So a person is comprised of 613 parts. So the same way that we have in the physical body 613 parts, so too our neshama has has 613 parts that correspond to the physical parts. So when we do a mitzvah with that chelik with that part of our body, let's say we take a little bit of esrog with our hands, right? So we do shmir seinayim, so it creates a or in that aver, in that chelik of our body, in the neshama, in the hechera parts of our neshama. But the koyach hadibur is something that wasn't nifgam to begin with, right? And there are other svarim say, the Kadmonim talk about other parts of the body that were nifgam, but just focusing on the koyach hadibur, right? So Yaakov Avinu's avodah was to be misaken. I mean, all the others and everybody's avodah is to go back to be misaken the chet of Adam Rishon, but befrat with Yaakov Avinu in this ofen, because Yaakov Avinu is the bechir shab obviously is the last one of the others, right? And that's the pshat in why he says Yaakov Avinu loy meis. Because the whole reason why Misa came down into the world was because of the Chet of Adam Rishon. Now, Yaakov Avinu is Masak and the Chet of Adam Rishon, so there's no more Misa. It's a tikkun. Right? So that's why we have to be Shomer Pipul, Shomer Mitzvah. It's not a person has to be careful with what he says. Now, also we know that Esav was a kolkol. I'm sorry. It was a kolkol Yaakov Vayedai Midei Esav. Klal Yisrael operates with koil, right? The Chazal, the koil in the Bate Midrashos, the koil in the Bate Knesiyos, the koil HaTorah, the koil HaTfilah. Klal Yisrael wasn't zeicha to that yet. Kol's mother in Mitzrayim. It wasn't. There weren't this idea of the koil of dibur that didn't exist yet, right? And even if you think about it, it's interesting because Moshe Rabbeinu himself was a kvad peh, right? He says Adonai cher al svasayim. Eich yishmeini para. How's para going to listen to me about cher al svasayim, right? Because he put the koil in his mouth when he was a baby. Right, as a state in Medrash. It's very interesting thing. Stamza Ha'or, I saw from the Ben Ish Chai. I think the Rabbeinu B'chai also says it, but he says he's aral svasayim. That means that it affected his svasayim are the lips. So we know that there are 5 moitzois hapeh. There are 5 different types of letters that get grouped together, and they're pronounced with different parts of the mouth. So the letters Beis, Vav, Mem, and Pei, you can check this out on your own. Beis, Vav, Mem, and Pei are all pronounced with the lips. Right? So Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to pronounce these letters, Beis, Vav, Mem, and Pei. The secret code, so to speak, for Geulas Yisrael and Mitzrayim was Pakod Pakadati, was with the Pei. And it'd be interesting that the Goyal of Klal Yisrael wouldn't be able to say that. Right, but there's a lot of Torah on this. But Al Kapanim, I just wanted to mention that, and I want to take it a step further. We know in Parshas Vayechi that Yosef meets Binyamin, in Parshas Yigad rather. Yosef meets Binyamin and he cries Al Tzavarov, right? Vayivkal Tzavarov, he cries on his necks. Now, besides for the Gemara in Chulin that mentions the Shisua as an animal with having 2 backs, which having 2 spines, which probably also has 2 necks, most animals don't have 2 necks. So what does it mean by Binyamin and Yosef that he cried on their necks? So Rashi brings from Chazal that he's crying about the Beis HaMikdash that was Charuv, right? Because the Mishkan Shiloh was in Yosef's Chelek, and that was going to get Charuv. And Yosef was crying on Binyamin's neck because Binyamin had 2 Bate Mikdash that were in his Chelek that got destroyed also. So that's what they were crying about. So we always heard over B'Shem the Maral, although I think we checked and we came out that the Maral doesn't say this anywhere. Al Kapanim, the Shemishmul, definitely mentions this Kama Pa'amim throughout his Svarim as a Yisoid, that the neck, why is he crying on his neck? Vus epis the neck, because the neck is the connection between the Elyonim of the person and the Tachtonim of the person. Really, the neck is what connects the Rosh, the Moyach, the Seichel of a person's Neshama, to his Leiv, to his Hargeshim. So he's crying on his necks. It's like Izazoi. The Beis HaMikdash, we mentioned many times, is the highest point in this physical world that connects to the highest levels of in Shemayim. That's the connection. So that's the pshat and why it's the next. But think about what we're saying more than that. The koil that comes out, the dibur that comes out, that lies within this chelik of the mensch, which is the neck. That's where the kana and the veshet are. That's where the koil comes out of. That's where the koil from Shevet Levi comes out of in the Beis HaMikdash, right? So v'loishamu al Moshe mikaytzer ruach me'aveda kasha. They weren't able to hear. Their ears didn't work because they had shortness of breath. They had a disconnect between the moyach and the leiv, right? It's a big question. Was Klal Yisrael doing mitzvahs in Mitzrayim or they're not doing mitzvahs in Mitzrayim, right? It could be that the pshat is that they were doing it, but without a tam, without a geshmak, without anything. They were just doing it mitzvahs hanashim u'lamada without, paying attention to what they were doing. There was some kind of disconnect. Moshe Rabbeinu was coming to be mechaber, to connect them back to doing the mitzvahs the way a person should be doing the mitzvahs. And, so I think that's I think that's a very interesting nikud over here in V'lei Shama Moshe Mikaytzer Ruach Me'aved Kasha. Now the pshat of why they were not b'nei Torah is because they weren't able to. The Torah is also that spitz connection, right? and a person doesn't have Torah, and he doesn't have that bridge that's going to connect the Elyonim and the Tachtonim. The idea of Torah isn't, it's not the pshat that Akash Baruch Hu, I think they said from Baruch Hu. I remember we were one time handling this with Rabbi Yenison by the Pesach Seder for a long time. He says, Akash Baruch Hu, the Torah, Istakel B'Raisa B'Ra'ama, Akash Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and created the world. So the Torah comes before the world. So anything that exists within the world is a taitzah of coming from the Torah. So it's not the pshat that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a cow, and now Shorsh Nogach is a parah, so now what do we do? No. Fakert, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a parak, Shorsh Nogach is a parah. And how do you have a Hechatim say how to do Shorsh Nogach is a parah? You need to know what to do. L'maisa, so you need to have a Shorsh Nogach is a parah, right? But obviously, even Shorsh Nogach is a parah mitzad itself has so much more of an oimik than, the Torah itself has so much more of an oimik than just what it is. But I think that's definitely something to think about, this nakuda of what's pshat that lo shamu al Moshe mikutzer Ma'aved kasha. Now, think about it, because Shevet Levi was always listening to Moshe Rabbeinu. They didn't have this problem. Meaning, who wasn't the Bnei Torah? Everybody besides Shevet Levi, because Shevet Levi were the only people that were learning. Now, I just wanted to just mention one last nakuda. It's really last week's parsha. But Vayamaru es Chayayim, at the beginning of last week's parasha, Pasuk says Vayamaru es Chayayim. They made their lives bitter. Ba'avoda kasha, b'chomer ubulveinim, with chomer's mortar, cement. Bulveinim are bricks, right? So we're used to growing up as kids, right? The charoises is like the bricks and the cement, right? All these things, fine. Everyone brings a zayir. It's a very bavus zayir in Parsha Shmais that says b'chomer is kal v'chomer and leveinim is libun halacha. Kal v'chomer is one of the Yud Gimel Midas Shaten Dreshus Behem, and Leveinim is Liban Halacha, to be able to understand the sugya, to flesh out a sugya. What does this guy do anything? What does one guy do with the next? By Maru was Chayim, they made us learn Torah. Yeah, for some people, Taka, learning Torah is Taka Shref for them, and for the mature and make them learn, the Taka would have been a great yeshiva for them. But I think the pshat is as I. The Gzeira of Shibud Mitzrayim was already nigzar by the Bris Ben Absarim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in the Mefarish to Avram Avinu what exactly the Shibud was going to be. And if Klal Yisrael would have been Isaac B'Torah, but Kal V'Chaymer Ubeliban Halacha, the right way, they would have been Zeicha to be Yaitze the Chiyuv of the Gzeira of Shibud Mitzrayim al Yedei the Isaac HaTorah. But being that they weren't Isaac B'Torah properly, so then they had to revert back to the Pashta Eifen of Bavay Kasha, B'Chomer Bilveinim. And that's not going to be Bavay Kasha. Because Torah mitzad itself, what we're seeing from here also is that Torah mitzad itself isn't Avay Kasha. If you look in the Tanchum in Parshas Noach, as Gimel I believe it is, there's a big arichos on the Shverkeit of learning, and it's taka not simple. Right? Well, what was Shevet Levi doing? Right? Shevet Levi, it's not pshat that Shevet Levi, they got away free. Shevet Levi didn't get away free. They had this shibud on a much more ruchniisdiga level. They weren't meshubed to spend time mixing with cement. They had to spend time figuring out sugyas, right? It's true it was an intellectual pursuit, in a sense, but it was a spiritual pursuit. It was on a much higher level, right? So they didn't have to do it physically, but they were able to, Shevet Levi was able to chap a rain in the Gzeres HaShibud in the Oifen of Kal V'Chomer and Liban Halacha, like it says in the Zohar. So that's the mile of Shevet Levi. But you see that what Aruch Chaim is saying, that the pshat is because they couldn't listen to Moshe Rabbeinu because they weren't Bnei Torah, right? But Shevet Levi that was learning the whole time, Avada, they were able to listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only that, Moshe Rabbeinu himself comes from Shevet Levi. All right, and I think with that we will call it a night.